Hi guys, it is April from Getting Hookah with It. Today I'm here to do my May wrap up. I read 11 books this month, which is I think the most I've read this year. Very exciting. Let's get into it. Now while I read 11 books, they were not all 5 stars. I did have a few 5 stars though, and I think today we are going to start with like the best of the best and then move slowly down until we talk about a book that I genuinely found very frustrating. So let's start with the best of the best, shall we? The first book I want to talk to you about is a book that I don't actually have. I listened to this on audio and it was Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. So Ronan Farrow is the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who basically has been making it his mission to expose men in powerful positions who are taking advantage of their powerful positions and victimizing women, sexually assaulting, sexually harassing women. And Catch and Kill very much focuses primarily on the Harvey Weinstein case, how he heard about it, how he was working with NBC on the story for months, and they just kept pushing him back and stopping him from actually going out with the story, saying they needed more information, and eventually he had to leave them and work with, was it the New Yorker? I can't remember what paper it was now that helped him expose this glaring problem in Hollywood and in the news industry, as it turns out. Now, Ronan Farrow, if you don't know, he is Woody Allen's son. He is also Mia Farrow's son, so he has gone with the name Farrow for a reason. His sister, he was raised by those two people. One of his sisters was adopted and is now married to Woody Allen. Upsetting and strange. And then his other sister was sexually assaulted by her father. Now, a lot of people, there was a couple of comments about the importance of saying, allegedly. I'm not ever going to say allegedly when it comes to children being abused. I'm just never going to do that. Child abuse has affected my life. I was not abused as a child, but someone very close to me was abused by a parent as a child. And I will never use the word allegedly because it's very hard to sort through those emotions when you're a little kid being sexually assaulted by your parent, the people who are supposed to protect you the most. In any case, what I loved about this book, one of the things I loved about it, was that he would talk to his sister about these cases and how to talk to these women. And in some ways, he has spent his life kind of apologizing in some ways. He himself says that he told his sister, just forget about it at one point when he was young, when she came out with the abuse. And it's clear that he deeply regrets that, and he has spent his life doing such amazing work and standing up for these brave women. And honestly, I admire Ronan Farrow so much. I thought this was brilliant. And also, another thing that shocked the hell out of me in this book was that he was spied on. Harvey Weinstein, well, it's not clear if it was Harvey Weinstein, but most likely someone at the very least hired a company that spied on people, and he would be followed constantly. And he started having to take his work, the stuff that he was working on that wasn't out in the public, and putting it in a safe, at a bank, because he didn't know what was going to happen to him. He was like fearful for his life a lot of the time. And a lot of the women who were trying to come out with their stories about these rapes that occurred, about these sexual assaults that occurred, were followed and were threatened, and it is terrifying. So the Me Too movement is real and is very important, and I thought this book was amazing, so important, and I love Ronan so much. Oh my gosh, wonderful man. Okay, moving on. I also read The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson, which was absolutely wonderful as well. This takes a snapshot of Winston Churchill during World War II, during the London Blitz. So World War II is on, and Winston is reacting to his city being bombed. Well, his country being bombed. But it really looks at London, and I didn't know so much of this. I feel like I read a lot of World War II historical fiction, and I do read from the perspective of civilians a lot of the time, and there are little bits and pieces of the Blitz, but this shows the ugliness of it. It also shows the resilience of people who lived in London at this time, how they got by. It talks about the safe houses. What are they called? Where they would go when the air raids would start and the sirens would start. They'd go to these little spots for safety, and the conditions there. It was unbelievably fascinating, and has made me want to read all of the historical, political stuff that Erik Larson has written, because it was so fascinating. It showed Winston trying to, get America to come into the war, which took so long and so much effort on his part. He really worked hard. It showed him trying to work with France to hold on when they were being invaded, essentially. And it also shows his inner circle, and Winston was such a strange man in a lot of ways. His quirkiness was very strange. Also interesting to read Catch and Kill as well as this at the same time, because he walked around naked in front of anyone, man or woman. He was just we're having a meeting, but I'm walking around. It was very strange. He'd have bubble baths in front of people, and you're like, this is not professional at all. And he was a very passionate man. I just so highly recommend this book. It is a chunky book. It's 500-ish pages. But you know what? It was so fascinating that it was very easy to flip those pages, and I'm so glad that I read The Splendid and the Vile. Very, very good read. Another 5-star read. This is the last 5-star read I have to talk to you about. It's The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. He won the Pulitzer Prize for this. Lots of Pulitzer Prize winners in this top 3. I didn't know that he won the Pulitzer Prize for this as well as The Underground Railroad. So Colson Whitehead, I think, is one of the most important voices in literature right now. He primarily, I believe, writes about the Black experience. This is a historical fiction book that takes place in the 1960s, and it follows a group of boys who go to the Nickel Academy. Now, they've been sent to the Nickel Academy because they've done something wrong in society, been deemed problematic in some way, shape, or form, and so they have to go to the Nickel Academy to be reformed. We follow Elwood, who, he will remain in my heart forever the same way that Cyril remains in my heart forever in The Heart's Invisible Furies. Those two boys I just care about so much. Elwood is such an amazing kid, and you follow him about, I think it's about 100 pages before he ends up going to the Nickel Academy, so you really get to know him as a person outside of this and how his life was outside of the Nickel Academy. And then when he gets there, he realizes how much abuse is going on. He himself is abused. And it's just such an important book to read right now with the state of affairs going on in the States, which has been going on for years, where people in positions of power are taking advantage and essentially abusing and assaulting Black bodies. And it's very upsetting read, I will tell you that. It's not upsetting the entire way through. I mean, he does establish friendships there, and I just adored this book. It is a short little thing. It is under 200 pages, but those pages packed such a punch. I should mention that the Nickel Academy was based on an actual school that actually existed in Florida, I believe, where many Black kids went and were abused, and there was actually a graveyard there, as well as it features in here, where Black boys were their bodies were discarded, whether they were murdered or whether they were sick or what have you. They were discarded, and their parents were told essentially, oh, they ran away, and they didn't run away. So it's based on that school. It's not a school. So good. Amazing, amazing book. So now we're moving into the 4-star reads that I read in May, which was quite a few. I think I have more 3 stars than 4 stars, but that's okay. The first is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. Oh my god, I finally read it, guys. I finally read it. It was on so many TBRs, and I had a hankering for it one day, and I was like, I'm going with it. I'm putting everything down. I'm gonna read this. So this is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. Oh, I should go and get Nora. She's upset. I'll come back just a sec. Somebody woke up from her nap, and she was upset. So we're going to film with Nora here, which sometimes proves problematic. But that's okay. That's okay, hey? We were talking about The Testaments by Margaret Atwood and the fact that I finally read it. So this follows 3 women. One is Aunt Lydia, which was so cool following her story. Oh my goodness. You know, one of the greatest villains in The Handmaid's Tale was Aunt Lydia. So following her and like learning about how she ended up there was fascinating. Then we follow 2 girls, one of them living in the outside world in Toronto, and then one of them living in Gilead, being raised to be a wife. And I loved Aunt Lydia's storyline. I loved the girl who was being raised in Gilead, being raised to be a wife. The storyline of the girl living in Toronto didn't really work for me. I found it very rushed. She learned something about her identity at one point, and it was so rushed. It was like she had, first of all, has this devastating blow in her life, which I'm not gonna spoil things. A devastating blow, learns something about her identity, and then is thrown into a situation that would be so opposite of everything she's ever done. Like, it doesn't make any sense, and I found it really rushed. Didn't love that at all. I do have to say, I do think The Handmaid's Tale could have stood on its own and can stand on its own. There's no reason to read this, really, if you want to just have The Handmaid's Tale in your heart forever on its own. That's totally fine. But I liked it. Like, it was so much more fast-paced than The Handmaid's Tale. I kind of wish it was a little slower and a little longer to match the tone and pacing of The Handmaid's Tale. Then it would have been more of a good series, I would say. I don't know. I did enjoy it though, and I mean, the things that were pointed out in here and the points she was trying to make are still so important. She wrote The Handmaid's Tale in the 1980s. we still need these lessons today. So yeah, that's The Handmaid's Tale. I also read the rest of Little Women. I had another copy of Little Women, and I thought I had only read part 1, and so I finally read part 2, and it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I do think that I prefer the first part where they're kids. You follow the March family and the children, the little girls in the March family, and I really love them as kids, and this follows them when they're older, getting married, and that's good too, but it's not the same. So I'd almost give like the first part 5 stars and the second part 4 stars. Yeah, I didn't love it quite as much. And strangely, I found Joe a little bit annoying in it. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get so much hate for that. Next is another 4-star read. It's The Tale of Despereaux by Katie Camillo. I read this for my niece and nephew and a few kiddos, friends of kiddos, and I just thought it would be a nice thing to do at this time. It is such a sweet story about a mouse trying to save a princess who he's fallen in love with. And I really want to read more Katie Camillo, that's for sure. This is something that I will definitely read aloud to Nora when she's a little older. I just really loved Desperaux and his heroism, and it talks about kindness. There's lots of like moral lessons in here, and I really love that. So I'd like to collect more from Katie Camillo for sure. And now we're moving on to some 3-star reads. Are we ready? All right, first up is A Man Called Ave. This was a favorite of, I mean, so many people adore this book, and I do understand the hype surrounding this book. This follows a very grumpy man. I thought he was older. He's only 59. So it's a very grumpy man, and a family moves into the neighborhood, and he is not having it at first, but they kind of soften him. They didn't quite soften him to the extent that I thought they would. He's still grumpy at the end. Like, he just does nice things. What I found kind of frustrating about this book sometimes was all of the characters in this book, which is essentially his neighbors, they didn't seem fleshed out characters in and of themselves, and they seemed so patient with him. He's like straight up rude throughout the entire book. He's straight up rude, and they put up with it, and they still welcome him, and I don't know, I'm not like that. If someone is consistently rude to me, I'm not going to enjoy them, and I'm not going to give them a chance. Yeah, so I struggled with that a lot. The writing was also a little bit odd. I think it's translated from the Swedish, and so there was a bit of strange wording in here. That said, I found it fun and easy to read. I want to read more by Fredrik Backman. Beartown, I think, is going to be my next Fredrik Backman at some point. I will read that. I'm a bit nervous to say that I gave 3 stars to Rules of Civility. I read Rules of Civility towards the end of the month. This is the story of Katie and Tinker, which is this man that she meets. It's the 1930s, living in New York, and she's friends with Eve, and they meet one night when they go out to the bar. Tinker Gray, and he's like this very kind of fancy upper class man and very handsome and charismatic. What I struggled with in this book was we really only follow Katie. And she kind of follows Tinker Gray. They're not constantly friends with one another. They're not constantly in each other's lives. And people pop in and out of Katie's life throughout this. And just as you're like, oh, here's someone that I can get to know, they're gone in an instant, and it's just Katie again. Yeah, I found that a little frustrating. There was a fun twist in here towards the end that I really liked, but it was that around 250 pages in that the twist happens, and that was too late to me. Sorry if that screwed everything up. Nora was playing with the tripod, and yeah. So I just felt okay about Rules of Civility. The writing is very beautiful, I will say that. And I feel badly because I think this is Olive from a Book Olives. I think it's her favorite book of all time. And I do understand the writing is gorgeous. I will read A Gentleman in Moscow for sure. But I just didn't feel close to the characters until the very end. And then I cared about Katie. And I liked the twists and turns then, but it took too long for me. Next is We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter. This is a World War II historical fiction book about Georgia Hunter's family. They were Jewish living, oh gosh, where was it? Was it Poland? They lived in Poland at this time. Most of them, they were split up in order to survive the war because they were being persecuted. And I loved one of the storylines in here. I adored it. It follows a young mother and her young baby, and trying to survive with a little baby would be so incredibly difficult. And so many of those scenes with her in it, I was like at the edge of my seat, freaking out, worrying that something bad was going to happen to her or the baby. I loved that storyline. If the whole book was just following her storyline, I think I would have loved it. But you go to so many people's perspectives in this story. One of the things I struggled with was I think it should have been a memoir. She should have written, not a memoir, I think she should have written a biography, a historical biography account of her family during this time instead, because trying to fictionalize this was, I think, too hard. The stories were kind of handed to her because of her family. She could interview her family about it. And that's great, but I feel like she relied on that. The writing wasn't that great. I didn't think the writing was very good. And I don't think that I will read anything more from Georgia Hunter. That story about her aunt, though, with the baby was so good. Anyway, so that was a 3-star. Another 3-star for me, shockingly, was a Nikki French. This is Friday on My Mind. This is the 5th in the Frida Klein series. And this follows Frida Klein. There is a body that is found in the Thames, and it's someone she knows, guys. It has on it a wristband that says Dr. F. Klein. So we follow a detective looking into Frida because they think she might have killed this person. That was, I think, one of the big things I struggled with, was that we weren't following Frida the whole way through. We kind of bounced back and forth between Frida and this detective. And I found Frida doing things in here. I found her doing things in here that weren't always very logical. And Frida, if you know her, she's a very logical person. So I found it weird. Some of her decisions didn't make any sense to me. But I mean, it was cozy here and there, and so I did enjoy it. It just was probably my least favorite of the bunch. Okay, and now we can talk about the 2-star read that I found really frustrating, and that is Little Darlings. Okay, first of all, this story is about a woman who gives birth to twins, and she's out at the park one day, and her babies are taken away. They're lost. Someone finds them, but she looks down at the carriage. She looks down at the carriage and realizes, oh my gosh, those aren't my babies. So first of all, this is marketed as a thriller. It is not a thriller. This is like light horror, very much on the light end of things. I think it's a retelling of The Changeling. And I found it extremely frustrating. So this woman has a husband who is just crap. the whole way through, and I kind of am tired of that storyline happening in thrillers in this genre where, you know, we have a very timid woman constantly being taken advantage of by other people, and not believed and all of those things. I found that extremely annoying in this book. I think if it was set in a different time period, if this was set in the 30s or the 1800s, I would have been fine with it. But it's set now, and she just puts up with her crappy ass husband. Crappy husband. And, you know, gets to a point where she thinks that he can't do anything. And I found that extremely annoying as well. I also found it a little frustrating because, you know, postpartum depression is a real thing. It's a real thing. I struggled with it at the beginning of my pregnancy. I think it was probably mostly just major sleep deprivation, but I struggled at the beginning. I went on drugs, and it felt like it was almost a pawn in this story. I didn't love that. I don't think I will read anything more by Melanie Goulding. I also found like there was no real twists and turns. And that was annoying. So yeah, I don't recommend this. It did have creepy parts, for sure. But I wasn't scared, and I rolled my eyes a few times reading it. Oh. So no, but those are all of the books that I read in May, which is a lot. What do you think about it? Did I read a lot in May? I think I read a lot because of Quarantine-a-thon. So thank you all. If you participated in Quarantine-a-thon, thank you. I'm going to go downstairs and get this one a little bubba or oatmeal. We'll let her decide. I hope you're doing well. Let me know in the comments below how your May was for reading. I'd love to know. In the description box below, you can go and find me on Patreon. I have a Patreon account, guys. I announced it very recently. And if you're part of the book club, I mean, I'm going to be announcing the 2 books we have to choose from very soon. So you can go and check me out on Patreon if you'd like to support me on there. You can check out my Goodreads page, my Instagram. I'll chat with you soon. I gotta go take care of this little one. Bye, guys.